We are live.
All right. Thank you, everybody. For the record, it's 5:15 p.m. on today, Thursday, August 19th. This is a time for a City of Wenatchee work session, so we will not start with the formalities. We have 3 items on tonight. The first item is regarding the Arts Fund, budgeted projects and overview from David Erickson, who's in charge of the Cultural Recreation and Parks Department. I won't use the acronym for that.
Well, some days it's better to use it than others. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. So we wanted to give you just a little overview of the Art Fund. We programmed this out for about 5 or 6 years, so you can see what those items are. And you'll see this again when it comes budget time. So I thought I would go down the different divisions for you, starting at the top under the kind of the admin category. We've got an art appraisal, and we do that every few years. We just did it last year when we acquired all those other art pieces, but we need to do that for insurance to keep it up to date. So we have that programmed in back in 2026. Art collection walking tour brochure printing, that's something that we took over from Art on the Avenues, and we printed those, produced those this year, and so those are out along the Loop Trail, the new ones, and they're out, I think, in the lobby upstairs at City Hall here and around town. And then the comprehensive plan update, 2023, we're due to update our Parks, Rec, and Open Space comprehensive plan. I don't have anything budgeted in there at this point, thinking that I would be the one preparing that plan instead of contracting that out. Capital, there you can kind of see the dollar amounts. Performing arts stage, Lincoln Park. So that's part of the Lincoln Park project to replace the stage down there. That's a big ticket item.
How much of that makes us go negative in our fund balance? Or is because we're building this, you're going to be okay?
For fund balance for the art fund, yeah,
Yes.
that doesn't cover it. Brad, do you know off the top of your head?
We're going to go,
Art fund balance?
we're going to go negative in that balance?
It depends on the time we will spend it. I think we'll be pretty.
Okay.
We will have another transfer of our some of this project. There should be, it'll be close.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to try to cash flow that project too. So that way the expense of the stage would be the very last thing in that project. So that'd be later summer next year.
Okay.
So we have more time to hopefully collect on that. Native Peoples Memorial Park, part of the Memorial Park renovation project down there. And then cemetery interpretive signs. This would be to do a kind of a historic interpretive signs at key spots around the cemetery for a walking tour. And the thought on that is that we could apply for some state grants to pay for that. So it shows $22,000. That's what we'd expect the expense to be, but that should be grant funded. Education. Community Art Support Grant, that's a program that we have had in place all the way back to when we first had an arts commission. And it's a grant program that helps pay for art education programs and things throughout the community. So we have that programmed every other year. Cleaning, maintenance, and vandalism, that's an every year occurrence. So all the sculptures in town, we go out there, you'll see Sid and probably Adele, will ring her back in again. To go out and clean all the sculptures once it cools down a bit more in September. And that's where we wax the sculptures, clean off all the crud that's on them, and then re-wax them and polish them for the year. Performing arts, so community concert series, and then again also community art support grant. And you'll notice on the community art support grant, we have it under performing arts every other year from education. So those kind of offset. And then visual arts, the out-of-the-box program is the utility cabinet wrap program, which we haven't gone anywhere really with. It was a painting program to start, and so you'll notice there's a few of those around town. We want to do a vinyl wrap instead, so it's not so hard on the stainless steel boxes, and we can change them out. And then when they get vandalized and graffitied, we can just clean it off the outside. Okay. And then a sculpture, a mural commission program. This would be kind of a new program to continue the process of adding artwork around town by commissioning either a mural or sculpture acquisition. So it could be 1 or 2 depending on the cost each year to keep adding to that collection as we move ahead. And that's kind of the general overview of the art fund at this point. Every year the Arts Rec and Park Commission looks at it and we kind of adjust as things come in and
So have you projected the 165 from projected city projects that are going to generate the 1%. I guess we got a sewer project coming up, don't we? That's going to be 16, 17 million.
Yeah, and I don't know where the North Wenatchee Avenue project falls into that. I think there's probably some elements to that. I know they had planned on some artwork incorporated into it.
Okay.
So those are kind of plug numbers a
But
bit.
the 1% is only based on city projects, right? So if we,
Yeah,
but so McKittrick Street would get
McKittrick,
some because it's a big project. How about the infra grant? Is that going to get?
grant funding isn't
Got
included
it.
in there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, but our wastewater treatment plant, that's a big number. Okay, so that'll bring you some number, and that'll be done about that time, I'm guessing. Okay,
Yeah, and those are our kind of the big projects that we see immediate, and then smaller ones outside of that. And we knew that we had these ginormous, two big projects, especially the stage at Lincoln is huge. So we've kind of been nursing it along, trying to build that fund back up over the last few years, so then we could tackle that project.
So with the First Nation or Native Peoples Memorial, this is all part of the Memorial Park redo that, so this is contemplating doing some measure of design next year anyway on the park.
Mhm.
That's okay.
Well, 2023 would be, we thought we'd do the call to artist in 2023 for the sculpture or whatever this
Oh,
turns out
okay,
to be.
That specific.
Yeah, and then 2024 would be just for that project element. The
Okay.
rest of the project, the electrical and all that other stuff would be.
and if we
separate.
chose to move that ahead a little bit, other than borrowing from other funds, we could move that up a year, or is there something preventing us from moving that up a year?
No,
other
just
than
really
just-
just workload wise really is the biggest thing. So next year, we have Lincoln Park, we'll have finish the acquisition in the foothills, the pool project, Kenzie's Landing, potentially Washington Park sidewalk project. And
Right,
there's
but
one-
the 10,000, so I'm just saying if we move the 10,000 of sort of planning in 2022 and the build in 2023, am I asking for too much?
No,
Okay. Because the 2022 would just be the planning part,
Yeah,
and 23 would be the construction part.
right, that's the call to artists. And we would do something like that probably in the
Okay.
fall.
So I will let you know if that's something that, I'm going to talk to one other person in the room and see if it's something that might be
I would
interested in
support that.
doing. What's that?
I'd support
I
that.
was gonna walk that over to you and
Yeah,
hand that to you, but we can talk offline about that.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
I guess just let me know so we can do the budget.
okay,
Forms
yeah, I'll
for
let you know, and we'll have to do a little moving around, but,
Yeah. So that's what I have for Art Fund.
okay. Any questions for David?
I guess back on the funding, or our money does, unlike McKittrick or the North Wenatchee Avenue and stuff, can we count our match, or does that get mixed into the federal money?
I think it's just our money,
So if we put 2 million in, then we would,
yes,
there would be that
$20,000, yeah.
20,000 comes out of that.
Mhm.
We can't count the Fed, but we could
No.
count.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave, is the Beauty and Bronze program, that was Art on the Avenues as well, wasn't it?
Yes.
So that's gone away.
No, it's actually, that's the only component of Art on the Avenues that's continuing.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's a separate deal, and they're
That's
still
fair.
working with the museum on that
okay.
and the school district. It's morphed a little bit, but it's still a similar program.
Okay.
All right, thank you, David.
Okay.
Riverfront Master Plan, is this Laura? Who's doing this?
Yeah, Laura's going to help me with this one.
Okay,
She's going to cover all the stuff that I forget. There's in here. So Riverfront Park Master Plan, let me get this into a slideshow format for you. There we go.
so is this the stuff that we're doing with the PUD and that sort of stuff?
Yes,
This is an update on that process.
yes.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so the process has been underway since, I want to say, April. Gone through the information gathering process, analysis of the opportunities out there. Had some public meetings and also survey work, and we'll kind of go over some of that and where we're at and where we're going. There's another public open house meeting coming up in September, and then hopefully this master plan will be adopted and then can get some of the projects actually constructed starting next year. So here again is kind of what's happened so far. So April, we started the process, collected information, kind of the base information to develop the base maps. June, we've got a subcommittee, a couple of subcommittees, a technical committee, and then also the RPAC committee to gather information. Had our public involvement workshop in July. So the information gathering process, I looked at a number of different things. Ecological factors, cultural, the built environment, what's down there, and the circulation routes. I should back up and mention this goes from essentially the Hilton, the area essentially from the Hilton to the old ice rink.
At Pybus to Fifth, for lack of a better description.
So opportunities. Took a look at a variety of different things. Access, viewpoints, what are the conflicts down there? Are the good slopes, good soil, bad soil, what vegetation is decent, what needs to go, what should be replaced? What are some of the opportunities that exist? As well as the programming side of things. So should there be fun runs? Are there vendor fairs, things like that down there? So what does the park need to support? And we had our first public open house in July at Pybus. Super good attendance. Had over 150 people come through at 3 different times during the day, which was really unusual for a public open house. And then the PUD...
Shows how much people love that park.
Yeah. And then the PUD also did an online survey and had this kind of survey monkey out there, and I think received feedback from about the same amount of people through the online survey that they did coming through the door. So really good public involvement on this so far. And some of the feedback. So the majority of people that responded were over 65. Of course, a few more females than males, mostly Wenatchee residents, and people that visit the park a lot. So you've got them from every day, 31% of them go to that park every single day for some purpose. And then one of the things that our consultants, or I guess it's our consultants, PUD's consultants did was put together these word clouds on some of the open-ended questions on what, on the survey tool. So here you can kind of see the bigger words obviously are the ones that had the more responses. So what does the park mean to them? It's community, it's walking, it's, family, all that kind of good stuff. Favorite place in the park? The garden sculptures, Pybus is their favorite, and the trail. And then how do they use it? Really, it's kind of what you thought. It's walking, it's bicycling, it's exercising. There's a lot of folks that go down there for the quiet to look at the river, contemplate, that type of thing. And we think that, that's going to probably continue when the additional apartments and housing and everything else develops right adjacent to it. That's really going to put pressure on this park space. Some of the opportunities that are out there, still a biking, trail access is huge, water access both visually and physically. Pickleball courts actually was one that kept popping up again too.
Not that there are any down there, they just want them?
They want them, yeah. And PUD is actually looking, through this process, we learned that they're looking at converting a couple of the tennis courts
That might be,
at Walla Walla.
that would be a good idea.
Yeah. And then conflicts, again, sort of what you would think. It's a lot of bicycle, pedestrian, the stuff you see the PUD do the commercials on.
Yeah.
Don't be this guy with the dogs and the bikes and all that stuff. Okay, so on these next slides, you'll see kind of the top graphic is kind of the existing. And then the next 3 down are different options that they started looking at as far as, in this case, it's circulation. So circulation conflicts. What are those pinch points that people, are more likely to crash into each other, do things like that. So the first option was a bypass. Do we need to do a second bypass trail down there to get people through this section? Option 2 is a widened trail. Is the trail too narrow? Does it need to be widened so people can pass more comfortably? And then the third one was an expanded trail network, so maybe doing different types of trails through there. And you can kind of see the percentage of people that like certain options more than others. Shoreline access, similar type of thing. So option 1 was concentrated. Do you want to have fewer, bigger areas for people to access the water? Or do you want to have less, but have them spread out, so smaller areas that are spread out? And the dispersed was more desired. Parking and transit, option 1, so kind of a collaboration. Let's do a mix between business use and park use. Expanded parking, adding parking. So that was kind of a difference where the expanded parking was one, but they didn't want to see more parking.
Right.
So it's kind of a conflict there. And then
They
option,
want more parking, they just don't want to take away from the use of the trail.
yeah, the trail or the park, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 was enhanced connection. So is there a way to get link down there better and better circulation routes? One of the things that we did talk about, I don't know if it really falls in here or not, but it was taking one of these roads, I can't see, it must be over here. This one right in here, I think, and having that potentially closed for events, or the one along the park closed for events, and keep this one open type of thing. So they're looking at different options potentially for uses as well.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about flexible space, so flexible uses, so it's a street, but also can be shut down, or a plaza that can also be an event plaza, but also just an area for quiet during the day.
Okay.
Multiple uses is huge, and,
Yeah.
and we see that through all of our other parks too. So it's not just here. Artwork, well-liked by folks. 3 different options, so decentralized, kind of moving it out a bit. The metered option would be like every 10 feet down the trail, you have a sculpture or something. And then centralized, let's create these art hubs that are sort of like what you see right now to a degree off the end of the pedestrian bridge, where you have a kind of a plaza area with a bunch of sculptures right there.
Art garden is another way we talked about it.
Yeah. And then activity levels. So what are those active areas? What are those quiet areas? And 3 different options there, either kind of spread out or big active zones. And then I mentioned landscape types again, kind of the naturalistic landscapes. People really like kind of the display garden down there. It's in that area. So is it a more formalized garden? Is it more natural? Is it more open? Is it more closed? So looking at different landscape types. So that's kind of where we are at this point. We've had meetings every couple of weeks, I want to say, to go through this. The team right now is working on alternatives. So that's the fun part. That's where everybody always wants to jump ahead to that. So they'll have those alternatives ready for us here in September for additional public input, more workshops. We'll present it to the Arts Rec and Park Commission in September to get more feedback. Hopefully at the end of the year, finalize that master plan. That'll come back to you guys to take a look at again, and then get it all finalized by the end of the year, and hopefully start building some stuff next year. That was it.
Just 2 things to add to Dave's presentation. So he's talking about when we were meeting, so we have a smaller committee. It's a technical advisory committee, so it's Dave, myself, staff from the PUD, and then the consultant. So that's more leading the project from the sense of feasibility and working to make sure that our councils are updated, making sure that the things that we're presenting to the public are implementable, right? Looking at it from the operational side as well. So there's that level. The RPAC is a smaller subset of community members. So we've got PIVUS on there. We've got the railroad folks that operate the train car there. Adele from Arts. So that's a community of users as well as space programmers. So there are smaller committee that helped us kind of set up the last public open house and how we should structure it to get the most attendance. So they've been really pivotal in that. Oh, and then of course, Councilmember Hornby's on that as well. Yeah. And then as Dave mentioned, we did that big public house open event and then did the layer of also online and we advertised on the trail with the signs and the QR codes, and it was done in English and Spanish. And so I just say all that to say that we are doing a lot because this is a very important asset. And I think we've heard that time and time again, as you saw with the level of engagement, the fact that over 30% of the users are there every single day.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. That's the daily thing, yeah.
That's a lot of piece. And then just one more thing, if we go back to the bike one or to the conflict, yeah, that one. So I think this is something that we've heard and the PUD has heard time and time again about the bike pedestrian conflicts. But when we were looking at the numbers, we said it looked like 40% of folks want the bypass option. But one of the questions was, okay, are those all walkers or are those all bikers? And so what we're going to do is a smaller focus group of bikers to get the full subset and really dive into that conversation. Because if we end up building some sort of bypass and the bikers don't want to use it, you know, we've kind of just wasted time and money. And so we really want to dig into that conflict because that's what we've heard the most about. So we will be doing a focus group on that piece to dig into that a little bit deeper and hopefully get a good resolution out of that because that's a real critical piece there. But yeah, otherwise I think it's a great process. I think Greenworks is doing a fantastic job, the consultant.
Yeah, I'm really hard on landscape architects. And I've been impressed with these guys. They've done really good work and really comfortable with the process that they're using and the approach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I appreciated what you said about getting focus groups together like the bikers, but it's easy to find the coalition of people that are biking.
Yeah.
Less so with walkers.
Yeah.
So if you're going to sit down, how do you sit down with a group of walkers to get their impression of the conflict?
Like some of those are just the ones that we pulled off the
Yep.
trail.
Yep.
And
So
we
I
have
think-
that meeting right there. So we could just, they could spin right in. Plus we give them food.
Yeah.
So they came right in. And
Yeah.
Yeah, the PUD had a booth on the trail that day too and was also pulling people in. But I think Dave's right. I think most of the folks that were there were walkers, not bikers. Because we heard mostly, well, the bikers are going too fast, you know, but then when I've slightly talked to bikers, they've said, well, the walkers are taking up all the space. So again, we want to be able to hear the
Yeah.
full spectrum and to understand a little bit better what the best way is to go.
So hearing from the public on what I brought to the committee, not only do some of the bikers have problems with some of the bikers that are using it as an Audubon, the walkers as well and runners.
Yeah.
So there's a small subset that think it's their Audubon
Yeah.
and it's not.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're delving into that deeper to find out if the bypass is even going to be used if we build it.
Right.
Any, too early to talk about the fencing and blocking the river view and vegetation? Are we too early in the program to talk about that?
I think that's coming.
That's coming.
I think they wanted to get a good base and I think again, they also did a good job of putting out enough framework of here are some ideas, but not so much that we didn't kind of specify here's what we're going to do with the
Okay,
park.
got
And
it.
so now that we've gotten a lot more feedback on the priorities and the ways that people use the park and want to use the park, they're going to hone in more on those types of things.
And they did talk about just from vegetation, you know, you can walk along the trail and not even know the river's there in a lot
Right.
of spots.
Yeah.
And so,
And I think part of, my thought was it'd be nice to be able to see more of the river
Yeah.
and really use that as one of the focal points about why you're down there, right?
so good process, more to come for sure.
Okay. And if you guys want me to bring something up specifically, come and talk to me and I'll bring it to that meeting. We have 2 coming up in the next 2 weeks. 2 meetings.
I'm going to trust the process, let the process do what it needs to do and, yeah.
No, I first of all, just piggyback on what Dave said there was, you know, the consultant, you know, I'm very impressed with how they presented things and just the way that that whole meeting was in the information gathering process was set up. I thought that was probably one of the best ones I've ever attended. DOT could take some lessons. But the other thing is that just, you're talking about the conflicts and those kinds of things. One of the things that I've noticed, and I'm not on the trail as much as I used to be, like when I biked and walked both, but just the decline in I guess we would expect to be the common courtesies, both of bikers and walkers. You don't hear near as much anymore of people when they're passing to vocally, passing on your right, your left, or whatever you're going to do, which makes a huge difference in just those kinds of conflict. And then the other thing is where, and understandable, I'm guilty of doing it myself sometimes, is you meet somebody and you just stand there in the middle of the road and you're gabbing away and guys are going around you like that. So there's, I think one of the things that maybe this will help to do is to provide educational opportunities, learning moments, maybe to reintroduce or to reinforce those kind of common courtesies for both groups.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Dave or Laura? All right, thank you. All
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
right, affordable housing. Glenn, Oliver, what's happening?
Thanks, Dave. You bet.
See if I can find the presentation real quick here. Oh, we got it. Great.
Oh, there you go.
Yes. You can. Thank you so much. Great. Well, we're here tonight to talk about the draft interlocal agreement between the City of Wenatchee and East Wenatchee for our revised homeless program, and also to give you an update on some of the activities we've been engaged in. Oliver did a great job doing a summer point in time count. That was something that was talked about at both councils, a desire to get that, and staff concurred that it was necessary as we move forward to get a good idea of where we're at in the summertime. And we got some interesting data. We knew the numbers were higher, but essentially once you pull out the unsheltered people who are living in RVs, it was about a 26.5% increase. We went from about 72 unsheltered persons to 98 as far as the point in time count. Of those, about 13 were identified in the city of East Wenatchee. On a side note, it's interesting to see that our from winter to summer, our RV population doubled. So if you noticed an increase in RVs in the summertime, you were right. So that was good data to get going forward as we work on our programs to verify that the need does increase in the summertime. As we look
Excuse me, could I get a clarification on, you have two different groups, kind of here, households and I assume individuals. Unsheltered households, is this where mom, pop, and 3 kids are all living
correct
together kind of deal?
Household, and they don't necessarily have to be married or related, but so a household has more than one individual. Then
So it could be a couple.
It could be a couple,
Okay.
correct. And so that's why you see the other number being greater. The unsheltered people as a whole is the complete number.
But from that, I would then deduce that the majority of our people are individuals.
Correct.
We
Yes.
don't have many of those
At least
household kind of arrangements.
at least in our unsheltered population.
Okay. Thank you.
Got it. Any other questions on that? And then looking at that, it really helps as we look at part of the very reason of our updated program is looking at getting to capacity so that we can, one, assist the people in their point of crisis and help to provide a path to getting out of homelessness, but also to be able to look at our community impacts and make progress on that. And so getting a better gauge of that is really helpful going forward as we design a facility and facilities. So again, looking at a status update of some of our activities and the interlocal. One of the things that we've done is, in addition to looking at, some of the studies we've done with building changes in the community on best practices, is actually going to some facilities. I think the council's heard before our visit to Moses Lake, our discussions with the city of Walla Walla, but we've actually visited the two mayors, Councilmember Harold, the Executive Services Director, myself, and Oliver. Visited the city of Burlington that has a regional shelter. They're using these pallet shelters. Ultimately, at capacity, they'll have 45. It's interesting, the city of Burlington mayor who spearheaded this project was very proud, along with their police chief and shift manager for their PD, to note that since they have had this shelter, they have had 0 issues in their downtown. They've been able to, they do have, sit, lie, sleep ordinances in place. They have capacity now where they can do enforcement. We've actually been able to do everything through relationships and get voluntary compliance and having folks move into the shelter. But they have some great best practices and advice for us. They spent 2.5 hours with us, which was wonderful. And this is just a view inside. The second location we went to is the city of Everett. They have a bit of a different situation. They don't have capacity. They don't have the funding to fully address capacity and do some of the things they would dearly like to, but they had some great best practices and things that we got from them. Talking with them, they were very gracious to share that. One of the things, though, that was very interesting is that we have been looking at both police departments in both jurisdictions at an integrated approach to outreach, doing it in a different way, being more strategic, looking at mental health and social work and partnering with our law enforcement who are there 24/7. And Everett's done some great work on that. And we had one of our Officer Riley attend with us, which is very helpful. So they were very gracious to share their information and resources on their integrated approach with, they actually have, 3 social workers? I think 2 or 3 integrated with law enforcement. And they work on services, and those are actually the individuals who place people in these shelters. So one of the things you can have happen if you do directly through coordinated entry, like locally, which does a great job, you might not get the targeted approach at who we're looking at as far as our emphasis in the program, which is unsheltered. And if you use a integrated approach with your law enforcement, you can really focus on who goes in the shelter. So we learned some good lessons. We'll be talking more about that with you later, but we just wanted to share that we had that meeting with them. This just happens to be one of the shelter products they have for showers and restrooms. But the other thing that we've been working on, which is rather exciting, is an actual potential project. This happens to be, if you recall, when we were looking at the funding for the 1590 funds, the Salvation Army submitted a letter saying that they were interested in doing a project and being part of the solution in our community. So we've met with them. They have several vacant parcels. In addition, an adjoining owner has a vacant parcel. So we did a mock-up. We, being Dave Erickson, helped us tremendously putting this together by hand. So it was really helpful. And we gave them some questions, and we provided this mock-up and said, okay, and we've talked with them, is this something that you'd be interested in doing? They have done some of these type of facilities elsewhere. So they got back to us, said, yes, we are interested in talking with you, and we'll be getting back to you. So we're waiting for them to get back to us. If you look at this facility, you'd have, this proposal would have 47 units. They could have up to double occupancy. We've worked with DOT to explore their partnership, and they're very interested supportive of the project and would work with us on fencing. You do an enclosed fencing approach. We'd be able to use the right-of-way that's in between the community facility and this. So we'll hopefully be getting something soon from the Salvation Army. And the way the structure that in our local setup is the councils are very involved in program development and giving feedback and direction. So when we get this, we would be coming back to you and then be going through the task force and ultimately Wenatchee City Council for contract approval if this moves forward. So we just wanted to let you know that this is something that that is in the works, and we hope to see what happens with it and bring it to you for your feedback and direction and ultimately decision making. So it's rather exciting. Other things, there's, for example, the Salvation Army has indicated, we've looked at other components that are helpful for phase 2. After setting up sleep center or sleep centers, and day use centers can help give up folks a place during the day to go so they're not, next to the fountain, what have you. Salvation Army's indicated that they were interested in looking at a day center potentially. So we'll see what comes out of that, and we'll bring that back to you. And again, the whole use of outreach, integrated outreach, is something that we're looking at closely and would be bringing back to you as well as far as a new program. So those are just things we are working on. Now, unless there are questions on those, and we'd be doing more into the weeds in the future. We are here to talk really about that agreement between the two cities, draft agreement. When we were doing the 1590, we heard got a lot of great feedback from both councils on what things you would like to see in agreements. And one making, while the actual program development would get into the actual metrics that would be developed, it's important that the agreement spelled out key components that need to be part of our programs going forward. And so we heard that metrics and monitoring to gauge effectiveness were a significant importance, that updating our priorities so that we had sort of more of a strategic approach that's tailored to East Wenatchee and Wenatchee was important, that we take that monitoring and those metrics and priorities in our updated plan and we build that into contract requirements and monitoring for these programs that we developed so that you can see the results and you can be part of monitoring them and redirecting those efforts. And that there be oversight and that both the council and then ultimately what's proposed here as a task force. And that we provide outreach and information to the public as another means of getting feedback and keeping them involved. That we look at partnerships for wraparound services and that we look at alternative models out there, such as City of Everett, and that we look at these services occurring in East Wenatchee and Wenatchee boundaries and focusing on that. So those were big components that when we did this draft interlocal that we tried to bring in there as your direction. And again, the whole purpose focusing on the use of those funds, the administration of those funds, and setting up oversight for that. So if we could, do we have the, Tim, can you help me get to the draft interlocal? I just wanted to scroll through that, and if we could have an interactive. It was on one of the things that we forwarded to Tammy. I have a finger drive if it didn't get loaded. Yeah.
We all have copies in front of us.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just go section by section. We can do that. So just looking at the first page under parties, that's East Wenatchee and Wenatchee, and then recitals that, skip through that. Really, that's the foundation of why we're doing this, what we're doing in the statutes, underlying it. Already covered the purpose. But looking at page 2, duration and termination, this was important that we heard from the councils that, that there be a process set up if one council decided they wanted to pull withdraw from the agreement and the programs and the local tax, that that be set up and that be clear. But in going forward with these programs, there'll be contractual obligations that we need to be able to honor and need time to work out. And so the suggestion there, and we worked with both legal counsels. Both legal counsels have, for each city, have looked at this, and staff and legal counsels felt 180 days was sufficient to work through something like that. Administration, this is a big part of this overall agreement. And first of all, the idea, we have more than just our 1590 funds that are being addressed under this agreement. Since we pulled our local homeless tax out from the county funds and we administer that now for the recording fees, we are actually required to set up a task force. Well, the thought was we need an oversight body to work through program development anyway. Why don't we just have one body that does that, appointed by, this says the mayor. We can go either way on this. I originally had it set up as the city council appointments. We can go either way. It'd be great to get your feedback on that. But that there would be appointments from each council to form a task force, just like we had before in our last program, except it would be focused by East Wenatchee. There can be a choice to actually have, later on, have voluntary members through the bylaws of that task force and the choice of each party, each jurisdiction.
Our preference is the city councils appoint.
Great.
If you want the mayor of Wenatchee and East Wenatchee to appoint the 7th person jointly, I'm fine with that. But I think the council should be the one that approve, just like we would with planning commission or anything else. Yeah.
That'd be great. And East Wenatchee was fine with that as well. So.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. I don't mind if the mayor of East Wenatchee and the mayor of Wenatchee jointly appoint one member who is homeless or formerly homeless. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
It might be easy for us to do without, but I think the councils should be appointing all the rest of them.
That's great. Well, we'll make that change. And just as we've done previously, the city of Wenatchee would be the lead entity for administration and staffing of the program. In our role, we would be, we can also apply for grant funding. So ultimately, when you do that sort of strategic plan, you might find that you want staff to go out and look for grant funds for permanent supportive housing, just for example. So it's set up in here that staff can have that responsibility when directed by the parties. We'd be managing the contracts, including monitoring those just as we have in the past. Be working with the parties on developing policies and procedures and the performance compliance. Those are key things that we heard from both councils as being desired. That we'd be looking for the partnerships for the providers to make the best use of resources and not be working in a siloed environment, but to do wraparound services. We continue to coordinate. We'd coordinate the activities of the new task force. We develop the performance measures as directed by the parties, the updated goals. And one of the new things in here is that we'd be doing joint or individual workshops with the city councils to gather feedback and direction. One of the things we heard from East Wenatchee, and I've heard from several council members, that there was that those joint workshops, or on an annual basis having a joint workshop, was very desirable to have that. So if, it'd be great to hear your feedback. East Wenatchee Council liked that idea about having at least once a year an opportunity to have a joint workshop. Is there any concern or thoughts on that?
Okay. That's a good idea.
Okay. Data collection and reporting. Again, this is a key component in order to meet the direction from each council we heard. So we'd be looking at those metrics. When we develop those metrics, develop programs, we'd be getting that feedback from the council, and on an annual basis, we can report on that. It's interesting talking to Everett. They do compile their data, and they said, that is looked at annually, and sometimes they find what they're tracking just wasn't useful, or it changes priority-wise what they want to track. But we would be coordinated closely with each council to do that, to be able to gauge how successful we are and be looking at that over time. Doing the annual reports, and again, we can modify that so that it's done jointly and include the task force as well. We'd work with a coordinated entry system for partnerships as a means to get individuals out of homelessness. The wraparound services were desired by the council, and it's a more effective program. Fiscal oversight, so just as now we'd adopt that into our budget and our facility planning, it would be the same for this. You'd have the city of Wenatchee had that final decision-making authority for contracts and for the budgets. And the East Wenatchee was fine with that. Let's see here. East Wenatchee would, under section 4, bottom of page 5, East Wenatchee would contribute 7% of their overall funds for the program, and the balance of the remainder would then be the city of Wenatchee. Typically, you're looking at funding coming at 6 to 14% for a lot of these grants that we get. 7% seemed to be a fair contribution for East Wenatchee. East Wenatchee was fine with that.
Does that cover a person?
No, it's about, I can't remember, 28%.
$24,000.
Okay,
So it's not a full person, but it's a contribution.
okay.
As a
But if we
component.
chose to say, have our police department have an outreach person, could that be paid for by the homeless funds?
Yes,
Okay, so that would be just a regular funding requirement.
Correct.
Not a holdback for admin.
that's correct. So we
Thank
wouldn't that would just be part of the program.
Okay,
We wouldn't be looking at that for
okay, thank you.
admin. Let me see here. The requirement that each jurisdiction adopt the homeless housing plan. That strategic way to implement it. And then under section 7, should things, parties decide to split, way to split up those assets based on a proportionate amount of what people put in. And then the rest is fairly well, boilerplate. A lot of this is brand new. A lot of it is built on a foundation what we had previously. Are there any, ultimately we'd be looking at, we'll tighten this up, be bringing it back to you in a public meeting in September, but are there any changes, recognizing that getting into the details, specific metrics, that type of thing is during program development. This is intended to lay the foundation of administration or oversight and responsibilities. Are there any questions or concerns or redirection?
So back in section 2, duration and termination, I mean, we talked about what it takes to terminate, give a 180-day written notice, but it really doesn't talk about a duration other than it looks like it's endless.
Well, the program's ongoing until the city's, there's annual reporting, annual monitoring. Every 2 years, there'll be contracts issued, so.
But we did talk about the fact that either entity could terminate it, or either entity could terminate the tax within 90 days, so it's.
Correct.
There's outs anytime you want to do one.
Correct. And it's set up to where there's a lot of feedback and interaction and direction from the council, and ultimately, on the budgets and the contracts, the city of Wenatchee retains that authority.
And then I guess as we get into the meat and potatoes of the metrics, that'll give some kind of, these are the expectations to get these particular things done and be working at this level and.
Yeah, and it's, there'll be components, Oliver and I were talking about this today, there'll be components that are metrics, say, unique to, say, the provider, ultimately, or the contractor for the sleep center that we can collect as far as that program. But there'll be also things that we as a city and our city family and different departments will be collecting ourselves. And that'll be something we have to develop, how do we tailor and get an idea on maybe once we're successful on the reduced amount of maintenance in parks or the reduced amount of vandalism, so those are things unique to our city family and the city of East Wenatchee city family that we'll have to develop as well, and bring those together so that we can get feedback also from the downtown association. So those will be things that have to be developed, that are something we haven't done before, but are important.
I was going to ask you earlier when you were showing us the other housing from Burlington and Everett, how long they've been there and whether they already have their own metrics plan, and if they've had the housing long enough for them to know whether their metrics plan is working or not, or is it showing something?
So Everett doesn't have capacity, so they've had success in placing people, but
Yeah,
it's all very new.
They got
It is-
300 homeless people and a place for 40 of them to go.
Yeah,
So what they will tell you is that is working well for the 40 that are there. They will tell you those 40 people caused a lot of problems on the streets and they're getting less calls for service in the streets. But there's obviously still a whole bunch of people that aren't housed.
yeah.
And did they have an idea of what it was costing them per person to?
Yeah,
them
they had a number. I think what was interesting in Everett, when I was talking to the mayor, and she said this in front of the group, and same thing we've said, is that she goes, yeah, Snohomish County gets all the money and they spend it out in the rural areas and don't give anything to the city of Everett. Right? So they're trying to do this on their own nickel and they got a grant for some of it, sort of like we did. They're sort of plugging away at it. And, this is run by the Gospel Mission, I think was the name. And I think the operator gentleman that we met, he wasn't going to let us go. I mean, he was so proud of the work they were doing and he was enthusiastic, and you could tell it was successful because he was there and he knew all the people and knew what was going on. And but I think Everett could use 6 of those.
Well, if I could add, Mayor, they've gone out on a limb. They haven't adopted a local option tax.
Right.
They've gone out on a limb. Holy Grand funded that project for 15 months, and they're searching for funding.
Yeah.
So,
When the county adopted the local option tax, but then they went first.
Right.
And so the city didn't have the option then to do so. So they.
that's how desperate the situation is in Everett.
So both of the, in the Moses Lake one too, they're all showing successes in the manners in which they're doing it, right? Moses Lake's got the night center, and I think they're showing successes. Everett's got the full-time center, and they're showing successes. So
Yeah.
I think our job is to sort of figure out which one of those metrics do we want to start with. I'm sort of convinced that the night shelter is the first place we need to start and make sure that we can do that and do that great, and make sure we have the right entity operating the shelter, because that's hugely important. And I would say secondly, and I'm a big proponent of whoever the outreach coordinator person is a city employee. It is not Catholic Family. It is not somebody else doing the outreach. It is a social worker who is employed with the city of Wenatchee, either in community development or in the police department. My preference is police. The mayor of Everett started them in police and moved them over to community development. But my preference is, and that we have a police officer who's dedicated. So you have one police officer and one social worker in the car every day working on those issues.
The chief has some great ideas on mental health training that would be a very integral component of that.
Or quite frankly, you would probably hire a police officer who's trained in this, and then you'd also hire a social worker to work with them, and that would be, in our area, that's probably enough to get out and be seen and be doing the outreach.
It's probably what?
That's probably enough of an employment base to have that work. So I'm guessing that's the model we're going towards, and how quickly we get to all of that. But that's if I got to pick, that's what I would be picking.
And that'd be staff's recommendation as well. It seems to work best. And then Because if we leave, for example, what Skagit County has done, they've opened it up to coordinated entry, and we have a great coordinated entry system, but they have this huge waiting list because instead of necessarily focusing on the
Chronically
population
homeless.
that we're looking at, it got broader. And so if we tailor this to our integrated law enforcement outreach, then we can make sure that we're targeting this
We're picking the
unsheltered.
people that need to be in the shelter and off the street. And I think the other thing that, that you guys heard in Burlington that I think we would do is if we had 42 shelters, that you would always leave 5 open for police. So you only put 37 in there. So that on any given night, if the police is out, they don't have to say, oh, our shelter is full.
And that's
You
what.
always
Burlington
leave
did.
4 or 5 open, so if there's some people out there that need to be in a shelter for whatever sorts of reasons that the police deem important, that they can take them there. And I think that's another important element to this as we sort of work through that.
Because Burlington did that, the police were successful as far as removing that issue there.
Yep.
And they had a great partner. They did some really interesting things where the police would come through multiple times a week and really build relationships. Well, and so did the city of Everett.
Right.
And it seemed to diffuse a lot of issues in doing so.
I felt it was very successful in Everett, the combination of the police and the social worker working together.
Yes.
And it just really helped. And the police weren't viewed as this harassment and everything. They were viewed as a friend rather than.
Right.
Are there any other questions on the interlocal?
So I'm fine with the way it's produced. Again, I would change those to councils. If you want me to call Jerry and ask her, I can do that. If she has a preference one way or another, if you'd like me to, just let me
Yeah,
know.
if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Okay.
I talked with Lori, but if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll talk with Jerry and to see if she has a preference one way or another. And then
Okay.
the plan is to adopt it next week,
We would have
couple of
that
weeks.
in September, but we would like permission to start working on filling the task force.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
so That'd be great.
Okay.
And then just next steps, again, working on the task force, getting an agreement set up. If we get a proposal from Salvation Army, we'll want to take a look at that as far as staff in each both Wenatchee and East Wenatchee, but in the mayor's office. But then we're going to want to set up workshops with each council and talk about that and get feedback and direction, and then ultimately work with our task force on contractual components, getting that put together and contract approval with Wenatchee. So Everett, once they got contracts approved, it took them about 4 months to get it in place. But that's using their own contract, their own staff. to put it
They use
together.
their own public works department to level the lot, and lay the gravel and run it out and run
Both
power
cities
and all
do.
the stuff they needed
Yeah.
to. So we would have to make determinations as whether or not we would use our public works staff to do that and be reimbursed by the fund, or if we would hire a contractor. My guess is our own staff would get it done quicker because contractors are busy as they can possibly be, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it.
What we heard from Moses Lake too.
Yeah.
They've really sped it up to work with your city.
Yeah.
So,
And, we'd have to, my recommendation is that we do an interim control. Reason being, we could do it through an existing system of conditional use permits, but given the temporary nature of the location, we're going to want to see how it works. Is that the best site? Should it go somewhere else? Should it rotate? There are questions as far as when we build this that will be part of that process. So it's not necessarily going to be a permanent site. It could be. So having some flexibility on, for example, not being required to put in permanent perimeter landscaping, things of that nature would be really helpful. So we'll be proposing an interim control so that we can have a little more flexibility on this and that it be tailored to a city project. So that will be something you'll be seeing as well, if that sounds agreeable. But it would be a necessary component. And then, once we.
Glenn, just a question
Yeah.
for you. I understand inter control, and I'm fine with that. East Wenatchee zoning,
I think what we would do is work with them,
okay,
draft something and being in communication with them.
because I certainly want them to adopt similar zoning
Correct.
in their neck of the woods. So if in fact we pick a location at some point that's East Wenatchee centric, that interim control or zoning is already allowed.
And I think-
I don't know that they're ready to do that yet, but I would at least ask that question.
Yeah, because ultimately those choices will have to be made by the councils on next steps, future phases, what that looks like. We're going to be recommending that it's key to get, okay, we get a sleep center in place. We really need that integrated outreach at the same time or shortly after to make it work. But then what we really like to do is, because we can't do 2 sleep centers at once, we just don't have the staff or
No,
capacity.
yeah, I'm totally, I get that, but I'm just, again, want to make sure that
But
if we're doing some special
Yeah.
zoning, that they should be looking at that as well.
But then go through a process of, that sort of strategic, it's like, okay, this is our experience with this first sleep center. Here are the funds that we have available, and really get some direction from the councils on next step priorities at that point. So then we can then plug and move in that direction for that next phase, whatever that direction is for the council.
Hey, that brings up a question in my mind. I know we've talked to a lot of different cities that have done this. Have we talked to anybody that this has not worked? In other words, the what not to do things. We've
Yeah.
heard a couple of different things, like Moses Lake saying,
Yeah.
don't ever put power, and Everett saying, make sure you put power.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard some
Have we
negative
talked to
things.
people who have failed at this, and what did they do wrong?
We heard some things on I think, and Oliver, if you could follow after my comments, where, location, be very careful where you place it. And so we've tried to think about that going forward, and think about the relationships, what's around it, and services, and that wrap around, don't just have a center that's just for sleeping, make sure that the services are integrated. Let's see here, there's another component. Some other important feedback was that really be careful to think, these are complex sleep centers. They're very, when you do a low barrier shelter, there's a lot to it to make it successful. For the safety of the residents, for the safety of the staff, for the impacts to the community. And so to make sure you do a lot of thought ahead of time and think through those, you're always going to learn things, you're always going to make some tweaks and changes along the way, but really try to be thorough up front before you start.
Yeah, don't mix families with single people, right? Don't put a
Exactly.
husband and wife and 2 kids in the same shelter area with just basically single homeless people. There's some stuff like those sorts of issues that, just some common sense stuff that.
All the shelters we visited or have spoken to are adults only, adult couples or adult singles. They usually find a different intervention for families. The things that come across my mind as far as what to keep your eye on is starting slow and making sure you have a structure in place that you can scale. So like Everett plans to build out to 57 if they can get them. They have 20 right now. So and then Burlington, same deal. They're not fully built out yet. So both of those are starting and then scaling up. And that is the goal, is to become fully occupied. And then the government partners we spoke to really talked about finding that right nonprofit partner. There's not a lot of communities that have done this and abandoned it. It's a very big endeavor to take on. So I think most would shy away from it and avoid the risk of failure rather than try to take the leap and do it and fail.
One of the things I thought was interesting in Everett, which is a full day center, again, they're there all the time. And there's, how many units there, 24 units or whatever?
20 right now,
20.
but 57 fully built
Yeah,
out.
so the guy that's running it said, yeah, I could take another 30, but he goes, these 20 people have become family. And now if I bring another 30 people in, they're going to disrupt the 20 that all look out for each other and take care of each other and work on their bikes together and whatever it is they do together.
Changes the dynamics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he's concerned about changing the dynamics without having another full-time body there to help. And so, to me, there's two ways to look at it. There's one is, well, they should have started with 50, they'd have a family of 50, right? But they're really nervous to expand. So, I think there's two ways to look at it, is you should have started bigger, right? And made your family unit look like the Kuntz family, right? Which is 78 or whatever, or as opposed to looking like the Bailey family, which is, so I don't know, I look at it both ways, right? I look at it like, maybe you ought to just, but I think you need more supervision, so we'll let them sort of figure it out. But I thought that was a very interesting comment about he wasn't ready to expand because he wasn't sure how the two families would get along.
I was really surprised about how peaceful it was there at the shelter in Everett. Well, both shelters. There were
Yeah.
no problems.
Yeah.
People got along. They did act as a family.
Yeah.
And the lady I was speaking to, she viewed it as this entire facility, this shelter is your house, but these pallets are your individual bedrooms. And people there were happy. They were socializing. They were working on their bikes, whatever. But it was very peaceful and friendly. And
One of the things we found that I found was very interesting, but I'm sort of a code geek, is that, I was looking at, okay, what's the management plan or the tool to, as you look at these facilities blending into the neighborhood and not having an impact on local businesses. And one of the things each jurisdiction, Burlington and Everett, did is they did a no sleep, no lie ordinance. And even before, you look at the court case and you have to have capacity in order to enforce that citywide, but you can do that in a targeted area. And for this legitimate purpose of not having an impact on the adjoining businesses. So we can do a zone around a sleep center when it goes in, so that specifically looking at loitering and managing that. So I thought that was interesting. Both of them have done that. They had some minor challenges with that, but it's worked well for them.
So I guess I'm hearing about families and everything else, but I think the ultimate goal and how successful are they at transitioning these people out of being homeless into successful life? I mean, that's really the ultimate goal we're here, right?
Yeah, I think there's
house
two-
a bunch of
yeah.
people as homeless.
I think
Forever.
there's two parts to it. It gives your police department a tool that they don't have now. Some people aren't going to like being bothered by our police officers on a regular basis. They might find another place to go live and just choose that Wenatchee isn't for them. I would be okay with that if that's some of their choices. Some will enjoy like having a place to stay and they'll become a little bit more functioning members of society. Some may transition into other sorts of housing if they do better, and both Everett and Moses Lake have had some success in those, but maybe it's less than 10% of the people, but if you have, if you get 4 or 5 or 6 in some sort of more permanent, stable housing, and you rotate people through, some people decide to leave, overall, they're better behaved in that area, so our parks get to be used by other members of that's a perfectly working program.
To add on to that, Mr.
That has some sustainability to it.
Sorry to interrupt. To add on to that, you're really speaking of a continuum. And Glenn
Yes.
kind of spoke to that. This is the front door, that outreach component, the shelter component is the front. Then you allow people to pass through the continuum into that stable, permanent piece, and that there needs to be a variety of interventions. It's not just shelter, it's not just outreach, and we spoke to that.
Yeah, and we know we need more capacity for housing, and at a certain point we will deplete the amount of funds that we have with the local option tax, but being able to apply for funds, there are all sorts of new opportunities coming out every year, and depending on the plan focus that each council wants to get through the parties in the new task force, we can then be applying for it and looking for partnerships to try to add to permanent supportive housing units. So there's an outlet from the sleep center to other housing, whether it's someone getting a voucher or whether it's a permanent supportive using housing unit because they need more long-term interaction with, a case manager.
So that part's to come.
Future phases.
Yeah.
So then, to me, the next question is, in terms of timeline, are we, you, we are going to be doing it, are you going to be able to get all the pieces in place to actually get this thing operational before the snow flies? Or are we looking at next spring? I wouldn't think we'd want to open in, January.
I think the timeline, let me say, the timeline is challenging and uncertain. With that being said, because we don't know yet, we don't have response yet from Salvation Army, and we have to take that back in.
If we had,
take a
if
look at it.
Salvation Army was a yes, and we felt like they were the right organization to manage, we wanted to both lease it and manage it, and we felt they were had the right skill set to manage, because you don't want to start this with a poor management structure, but if they could do both, and we got an agreement within, 45 days, and you got another 90 days to get it set up, and I mean, I don't know that you'd be fortunate to have it done by December or January. I would assume you're looking at probably sometime next spring.
Probably, yeah. Spring's probably more
That was
likely.
kind of my
Yeah.
sense.
It's, you're looking at.
Let's
having
put it this
this-
way, I was hammering them for this year, and Glenn told me that wasn't gonna happen in any uncertain terms, so.
If we.
I was doing what you were doing, it's like, man, we gotta get these ordered, what's it, and it's like, there's just more stuff that we gotta
Yeah.
get through, so Glenn's educating me on timing.
And if you look at site construction, doing utility work and leveling, you're looking and fencing, end of October is pretty much the end of that.
Yeah.
Unless we get lucky. So it's going to be, and apparently Salvation Army has a 3-month approval process they go through. So most likely spring, but we're going to keep pushing and try to do a good, thorough job, but also.
And we do have a couple of spots, our friends at what used to be, that's now whatever it is.
Yeah, so the Wenatchee Rescue Mission.
That's what I said, the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, they think they may have 24 beds or so that might be considered low barrier shelter.
They have a new approach. It's low barrier. They want to take the lower floor and make it completely low barrier. They've always had additional capacity. What that does for our officers is they have, and they've already met with the officers, already offered up 5 beds. And so they want a partnership, and they're very interested. The People's Foundation chose to go and do their own funding. That left some funding on the table. So they're going to be getting back to us. They actually have a day center built in there too, which has some real benefits of having folks pretty much staying on site and not going downtown.
So we may be able to, through this organization, actually get something that would give us some interim help if we get into some trouble.
We might be able to start that. That's a possibility, a real possibility, depending on the feedback we get and the decision of, and that's a Wenatchee fund, so that would be your call. We'll come back as soon as we get some feedback from them to the council.
Travis?
I'm going to say something else than I originally. I appreciate the impact this has had on the community in coordination with all the other efforts that are out there. I'm excited to see some of these things pop up that weren't happening before. Great job on the interlocal for the foundation, but thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? We meet in regular session next week. Looks like we've only got a couple of items. We'll hopefully add a couple things to it. We may talk a little bit about tax increment financing, just in a brief way of doing that. But I don't think we have anything for exec session, so just regular meeting next Thursday. All right, everybody, thank you. I'd say we're adjourned, but I don't know that we actually technically open. so-
Thank you, everyone. We're off camera.
Nice job.
Nothing at 3 next Thursday, right?
What's that?
Nothing at 3 o'clock next Thursday,
I don't know.